Welcome to The Just Life, where we expose problems of injustice, engage with people making a difference, and explore ways that we all can live justly in everyday life. I'm Benjamin Watson, and I'm joined by Justin Giboney, a good friend of mine. He's an attorney, a political strategist, and president of the AND Campaign, a Christian civic organization that seeks to bring biblical values and social justice together in public discourse. Justin is a writer. He's a football coach. You can see some of his work in Christianity Today. He co-authored Compassion and Conviction, a book that talks about the AND Campaign's guide to faithful civic engagement. He's also the co-host of the Church Politics podcast, where he challenges Christians to move beyond partisanship and into redemptive engagement in the world. Welcome to The Just Life, Justin Giboney.
Glad to be here, man. Thanks for having me.
First bone to pick before we get started. You already know where I'm going to go with this. Justin's also, he was a college athlete, football player, Vanderbilt University. And I remember a day when you all came to Athens to play the Georgia Bulldogs. And we did not, full disclosure, we did not know each other back then.
No, that's true.
And we dug up this picture, which hopefully we can like
That
show.
was crazy when you found that.
Yeah,
too. That blew my mind.
hopefully we can show this picture because I got on some shoulder pads that were the size of like a spaceship.
Yeah. The nose guard.
And you were attempting to tackle me. We don't know the
I'm
outcome
pretty sure
of
I
that
made
play.
the tackle. Chances are I made the tackle.
You think you did?
Yeah, chances are I made the tackle.
I think we're going to have to find the film, because eye in the sky don't lie.
That's true. Let's look for it. Let's figure it out.
Well, it's amazing.
You call your people, I call mine.
Call people. Okay,
Yeah.
we can do this. So what's crazy is we had the opportunity to circle back together years later. Mm-hmm. We were on a panel together at MLK 50 in 2018, the 50-year anniversary of Dr. King's assassination. We were in Memphis, and we were on a panel just talking about many of the things that you talk about regularly, conviction, compassion, how does the church specifically engage in a political atmosphere on issues of race, faith, that sometimes are very polarizing. Mm-hmm. How are we faithful to Scripture in that? And I remember I'd heard of you. Obviously, I'd read some of your work. I agree with pretty much all of it. Like, this guy talks my language, but it was awesome to see you speaking on stage, and that's something that you do regularly. So before we really get into what the AND Campaign does, what kind of formulated your, I guess, attention and desire to engage with justice? You're an attorney. Yeah. You studied law after Vanderbilt. Like, where did that come from for you?
Yeah, I think it happened much before I got to college. I think it starts really with my grandfather. So my grandfather was like a civil rights era preacher. Okay. And I just remember I would go to stay with him for the summers, and he would just take me around. He'd always be helping somebody. He'd always be bringing food to somebody. He'd always be talking to somebody's landlord or paying, you know what I'm saying? Stuff like that was just what he did. So he preached, but outside the church, he was always helping other people. And I think early on, he gave me an understanding that if you're just helping yourself, you're not really doing what the gospel tells you to do. Like, you got to help those who aren't able to help themselves. And I think that just stuck with me from an early age. That model was something that I held on to. Yes.
So you knew you wanted to go into, you knew you wanted to be in it. You knew at some point you wanted to engage with justice, whether it be professionally as you do, or really uniquely how you have created the AND Campaign on the idea of moral order and social justice.
Yeah, and I'll say I didn't even think of it at that time as a profession. Okay. In my head, that's just something that people
it's just
who
a
love
way
God
of
did.
life.
Yeah, that's just something that you did especially if you were a leader and you love God, you serve people. Yeah. And I'm thankful for that legacy.
Yeah. Well, what led you to start the AND Campaign?
So after I graduated from Vanderbilt Law School, I come down to Atlanta. I'm working as an attorney, and I get into politics. And so I'm working on the mayor of Atlanta's who would become the mayor of Atlanta's campaign. After that, I'm just working on campaigns, running campaigns for about a decade. And I'm getting all this great experience. I'm learning all these things about politics, the ins and outs, meeting all kinds of people. But I think it became clear to me that I needed to use what I was learning for the kingdom and not for a particular party. Yeah. Because what I was seeing was being in Atlanta, which was a very progressive space that a lot of folks who were running for office and things like people like Dr. Jaha Howard, who we know, were being forced to kind of push their convictions aside. And I was like, why is that the case? Why can't somebody run and represent who they are and also represent everybody, right? And at that same time, you had a lot of stuff going on the right too that, I didn't approve of. And so I was like, I think Christians need a different framework for how to engage politics. And so I ended up leaving the mayor's office and starting, and this is a long story short, starting the AND campaign with two co-founders, Angel Maldonado and my boy Sho Baraka, to provide a different framework that wasn't just partisan, that wasn't just ideological, but looked at politics from the compassion and conviction of the gospel.
And what was the response to that?
Initially, I mean, there were a lot of different responses. It depends who the audience was, but I think
your target audience.
Yeah, our target audience response was, "Man, that's what I've been thinking. I just hadn't articulated it."
Yeah.
So we didn't create the framework; we articulated a framework that connected with a lot of people, and so that's why I think it shot out fairly quickly. Along with the fact that I think Sho already had kind of an audience that he was speaking to, and that helped us as well. Did
the events of the murder of George Floyd? Obviously, we had COVID in 2020. Everybody sitting there watching this murder, and I remember vividly your name, the AND campaign, being like a trusted resource for a lot of people, especially in white evangelical spaces who were trying to figure out what's up with this race thing. Like, this thing real? I don't want to get drawn into some of the other ideology on the left when it comes to different social issues, including race. They needed a trusted voice. Did 2020 accelerate the growth of AND campaign in any way? Like, what was the outflow of that?
I would say that was almost our second launch. People were looking for answers that weren't just purely secular, and they wanted to know, can I be orthodox and faithful and engage in justice in a real way? Can I talk about all this racial injustice without going against the gospel? And the answer is, of course. But people didn't know that. People hadn't been taught that. They hadn't been discipled to understand that from a theological level. And so we're coming in talking about Amos. We're talking about Prophet Isaiah and all these folks, and what they were, Jeremiah, and what they were saying, especially Jesus, and how it does connect to those issues. And unfortunately, a lot of people were raised and discipled in places where you had to separate the Bible and scripture from justice, which was odd to me. Like that, like I said, I learned from my grandfather. I was in a different position, but I had to realize that some people somehow separated those two things, and we were just reconnecting what God had already, shown them.
Why do you think that's the case? Why do you think so many people were separated? You would think that as you read the entire scripture, I mean, the prophets that you mentioned are usually included when people go to church. I usually talk about these people. Why do you think there's such a disconnect and such a gap there?
Yeah, I think throughout history, and we can even see it in the Bible, it's usually a product of self-interest and pride. And so it was in the self-interest of some groups, even some Christian groups, some white evangelicals, not all, but some, to separate justice from what they would consider kind of moral order or morality. Because if some of the things I'm doing benefit my pocketbooks, or they kind of exalt me, but they don't necessarily fit with all of the Bible, then I kind of push those aside and focus on what I want to focus on.
Yeah, well, how do you address that now? Because we're still in that space, and I feel like even in conversations that we've had together, but also if you look at social media or you speak to some of your friends, we're still we continue to be in this space where justice seems to be something that is not godly. It's something that is solely political, and it's something that is secular. Where I would come from a space saying that justice and righteousness are the foundation of your throne, is what it says in Psalms. Yes. I mean, you talk about Micah 6:8, all those verses. Justice is part of God's character. Why are we still in a place where we still can't get this right?
I think it's still pride and self-interest. But really, people have to be able to see where people are coming from. So one thing that I learned, and I didn't know this before, is there are people who may be smart, may be successful or whatever, that really don't know the history of race in America, that think they know, but that have been lied to. Yeah. And so I think we do. It's tough, and I know some people don't have the patience for it right now, and I get that. But I think we do have to have the grace to say, okay, some people don't know, this might take some time. Yeah. Because I've had 70-year-old white men come up to me and say, I just didn't know.
And you're thinking like, how did you not know this?
How did you not know? That's crazy.
What do you mean? How you didn't know?
And that's the thing. It's not necessarily for me to understand, but I want to say, okay, let me see how to work. So one thing I try to do is I try to say, everything that secularism is telling us is justice isn't justice.
Okay.
So you're not completely wrong by saying that everything that this group or that group says is a justice issue is actually a justice issue. And that's a good place to start because you're separating it from in ways that justice has been distorted. And I think one of the problems that a lot of Christians who talk about justice run into is they're not willing to critique the secular side.
Okay.
A lot of folks who are justice oriented in some ways are seeking validation from those secular activists and those secular academics. And so they're going to take, let's say, for instance, Robin DiAngelo, and they're just going to take that whole and bring it into the church. And I do think that's a problem. So one thing I've tried to do is say, let me take this through biblical scrutiny and tell you what the excesses of the progressive left and the secular left are when they talk about it. But now let's make it biblical. Because when we think of justice, we really shouldn't think of secularism at all. If we think of justice in America, we should be thinking of abolition. We should be thinking of the civil rights movement, all which were centered on the Bible, right? But now we have a kind of secular justice that in many ways is centered on the individual. It's centered on the individual kind of individual freedom, like autonomy, me being able to do self-expression. That's not the justice that Fannie Lou Hamer was talking about. That's not the justice that William Augustus Jones was talking about. And so many more people, it's very different. And the problem I see is that we need to separate that. And when you do separate that, when you're able to critique what the left is doing along with what the right is doing, now you allow people who see there is something wrong with how some people present it. You're opening it up for them to say, okay, there's a different way.
Yeah.
But sometimes we just don't make that critique on one side or the other.
Yeah, take me to that conversation a little deeper. You're having this conversation with someone who, and I get it. You know, I think that you pointed out something about grace, and many times I even talked to my father about this. He's like, Benjamin, you need to have a little grace for some of these people because sometimes they just don't know. And then there are some people who are malicious. They want to remove history.
They don't want to understand.
They don't want to understand. They want to protect their own self-interest. They want to protect their own pride. They don't want to confront injustice because it makes them feel bad. Why? Well, I think I know why. But take me to the conversation that you have. Like, how does that work practically for people who are listening that want to have a conversation about separating justice issues and filtering those things so that we can have an idea of like what really is biblical justice? Like, what's the first step in that conversation with someone who feels like I'm averse to justice because all these things, sexuality, are attached to social justice?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I'm going to say is the world always distorts everything. The world distorts marriage. The world distorts. So just because it distorted justice, you're not going to touch justice.
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense to me. But then I'll also say that you have a point in that some things that are presented as justice aren't justice. So for instance, just to give you an example, gender ideology. Giving kids puberty blockers and making that decision for them that'll affect the rest of their lives isn't a justice issue in the way that the Bible would look at as a justice issue. So if you look at the left, the secular left, and you say that's not justice, we have some agreement there.
Yeah.
If you're looking at the sanctity of life and you just saying, have an abortion whenever you want to, this is actually a beautiful thing and all that, that's not a justice issue. That's not something that a Christian should engage in. We have an agreement there. Yeah. So now that we have some agreement, I've kind of defused the conversation, and now we can get into deeper things where they're seeing, I'm not just here to call you stupid. I'm not just here to say how bad you are. I actually want to understand and want to hear you, and I want you to understand that we have some connection here, but I'm also going to challenge you from there.
Yeah.
And I think we miss that because too much of our discourse today is really just about telling people off. Like, let me tell you where you're wrong at, and I hope you feel bad. And I hope you feel
and I hope I get a lot of retweets and everything about it.
And I hope I make you feel like you've made me feel. And I get that. I get people wanting to purge in that way. But if you listen to the speeches of Martin Luther King, you listen to what Fannie Lou Hamer was saying, they didn't hold any punches, but they were faithful enough to be artful and to say it in a way that people could accept it. Now, not everybody was going to accept it, but if my main goal is to offend you, that's what's authentic today. If I'm the dude that's going to come, I'm going to offend you. I'm going to say whatever you don't want to hear. I want you to feel bad. That's what's cool today. That's not what's faithful, though. And so I think that's one of the differences and one of the changes that we have to find that again, because I think we lost it.
Yeah, and I think in reading the things that you write, there's clear that the goal is to righteously offend, if I can use that terminology. To take people to take people to task, but also is laced with compassion because the goal is moving forward. The goal isn't just to create enemies, and the goal isn't just to create attention. You write a lot. As I mentioned, you wrote a book, but you also write for Christianity Today. I was reading one of your articles, and you always do a great job of addressing kind of the false dichotomy between personal responsibility, but also identifying the impact of oppression in marginalized communities. Too often it's a either or. You will hear people say, usually further on the right, that everything is about like your own autonomy and what you do for yourself. Like, this is America, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. And then on the other side of it, on the far side of the pendulum, it's the idea that there's nothing we can do until somebody else fixes a broken system that they broke.
Right.
You've done a great job of addressing both of those, because there's some truth in both of those categories. But you wrote this. I'm going to read it. I love this, what you wrote. You said, "We should be suspicious of anyone who breaks a man's leg and then shames him for limping, as well as of the man who complains while refusing physical therapy to work on his limp." It reminded me of what MLK said when he said, it's all right to tell a man to lift himself up by his own bootstraps, but it's a cruel jest to say to a bootless man that he ought to lift himself up by his own bootstraps. So why do the right and why do progressive always seem to gravitate towards these extremes on these issues?
That's the nature of the culture war. We go with things that fit on a bumper sticker, that are black and white, and we don't have to really have any nuance, because if we add any nuance, then we're giving the other side some credibility or some credence or something, right? So if we go to the further extent and say it's all about personal responsibility, and if you aren't where you want to be or where you should be, it's all on you, and I don't care what happened in the past, that's all on you. The Bible doesn't, that's not defensible with the Bible, but at the same time, here's the thing that happens. So I understand that it's wrong to come at somebody and be like, I don't care what happened to you and your ethnic group, even if you were enslaved here longer than you've actually been free. I don't care. It doesn't
Exactly.
matter, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't really have any impact. Get over it. Other people had problems too. That's ridiculous. But at the same time, I've been in circles where, and I was recently at an event where somebody was talking about responsibility like it was a bad thing, like to tell somebody they ever have responsibility for this, and that is bad. And I'm thinking, while I'm sure she thinks that's compassionate, it's actually not.
Debilitating.
It's actually debilitating. It actually steals your agency and your dignity. God gave us agency, which means we get to make choices in our lives. Even slaves who had a lot of choices they didn't get to make, they understood, if you read what they were talking about, they understood that there were still some choices they did get to make, and that they had to make those choices in a faithful and upright manner. So when somebody comes to my community and you tell me I have no power, no say over what happens to me at all, I'm going to push you away, just like I'm going to push the person away that says I'm responsible for everything that happened to me, because that's disempowering. That's not helping me, especially when I do have things in my sphere of influence that I want my people to see. I want my people to see what you do control, that, okay, you can't end systemic injustice automatically. You can take care of your family. You can be an honorable man, and you can take care of your kids and do what you can do. Now, there's racial stuff that impedes that sometimes, but there are so many choices that we make for ourselves that can help, generations coming after us. I want my people to see that. And anybody who pushes against that and doesn't want them to see that on the right or the left, we got a problem. And that's basically what I was saying in that article.
No, that was good. We've had that conversation. We see it on the ground level. People that know you're a football coach too. You coach your sons in football. You're in community, you see a lot of things. And one of the things that we have talked about is just the role of fathers. Mm-hmm. And we've talked about the necessity in Black communities specifically, because that's where we reside, of fathers taking care of their children, taking care of their households. We've also talked about just the atmosphere of communities and of having that sort of agency and deciding, hey, I'm going to take care of what I can take care of. Why is it so difficult? Like why is it so hard sometimes for people to do that, even knowing that they have no control over systemically what has happened? I mean, you look at neighborhoods; they're obviously segregated because of things like redlining. There's the legal process, but how do you encourage people on a day-to-day basis to do the things that you're talking about?
No, that's good. And also, we both know that there's good and bad dads in every race, in every class. There's specific problems in our culture, and there's specific problems in other ones. I want to address those and not run away from them because somebody else might think something about us. No,
because a lot of times,
deal with the issue.
Well, because a lot of times, if you talk about it, this is the balance that I have. So you're right. There's fathers there's problems with fatherhood in every single ethnicity, but if we talk about it in our context, we have to worry about how someone is viewing us.
Right.
And we have to be careful with our language,
right? Because
I never want to heap more on us that's already been heaped on us.
So here's what
you
happens.
know what I'm saying?
No, exactly.
And so what happens for some people is they just decide not to talk about it,
exactly,
because they don't want to be in a situation where they're being viewed as heaping on like the outsider.
Yeah. So there's two things that happen. I can refrain from talking about it because I don't want folks on the right to use that and say, "See, we told y'all."
Yeah.
Right. And so I'm like, I don't even want to say this because you're gonna use it for the wrong purposes.
Exactly.
Or if I do say it, now I got people on the left saying, "Oh man, you this, you that. Why you putting us down?"
Yeah.
Because I'm trying to solve an issue, bro. I'm not gonna hide an issue just because what somebody else might think about it. So that is the kind of the conundrum, the tension that we deal with. And I think the problem in general, and I'm gonna be more community specific for us, is, and this is really a general issue in America, we have a very adult-centered culture.
Okay.
Our culture, we think of ourselves first. So when you want to talk about the sanctity of life or whatever, it's like, what's best for me in this moment? Mm-hmm. And so I think what a lot of people get caught into is thinking of themselves first, right? Saying, man, I really didn't want to be a part of this relationship in the first place. Me and her wasn't really even cool. And how can I kind of expand my enjoyment of life and what I do? I got to do me first. And if when you have a do me culture, that's never good for kids. It's never good. You also have the issue, and I want to be historical because there's always historical context, where you have a people the family was torn apart for years, right? So you have families that were completely torn apart, going through a whole lot of issues. That plays a role in how you see family, how it stays together and all that. But ultimately, I can keep talking about that, or I can say something's got to change. And I've got to take, we've got to take some responsibility for that. So that's why I'm trying to see the historical context, but also say at some point, how do we do this better? I think part of that is seeing past this adult-centered culture. I mean, just like a lot of folks, a lot of former athletes that have podcasts like you do, they're going to be talking about who they sleeping with, all that. You know what I'm saying? There's a culture of, I'm still out here doing my thing. I'm really just still trying to be cool rather than be honorable. and I won't say any names because I don't want to put you out there, but I'm just saying that's an issue, right? Like
it is an issue.
You see 45, 60-year-old dudes talking like we in the locker room at 16,
and it's not
19.
And it's not constructive. You're not helping anybody, and you're definitely not helping the communities that you say you're trying to represent.
Right.
And another thing that we talk about, even from a justice perspective, the issue of marriage. Mm-hmm. Where does marriage play a role? For a father, part of living justly and treating people fairly is for a government, a country to endorse marriage as a public good, obviously, and protect it. But also within a community, within a family, part of justice is the relationship between, as a father, the mother of your children and your children. How does marriage play a role in some of the things that we're talking about?
But you hit on it, because if I'm out in the streets and I'm talking about, I want somebody who doesn't even know me to do me justice. I want somebody who I've never interacted with, who may be in some courthouse or some legislature miles away from where I'm at. I want them to do justice by me. Am I doing justice by the people who are most dependent on me? Am I being honorable to the people who are closest to me? That's an issue that we got to deal with.
Yeah. Because
if I can't understand why somebody who don't know me would do me an injustice, but then I go do the people that I do know injustice, then maybe I know a little more about that than I want to admit. And so, no, family is the foundation. So we have to deal with systemic injustice, but we also have to deal with where the family's at. Because there are times when you're not going to be able to solve everything, but to have a family that's whole, and everybody can't do that, right?
Exactly.
When it's in your control, when it's in your sphere of influence.
Exactly.
To have a family that's whole goes a long way in pushing back against injustice and pushing back against just many of the things in the human condition that we're all going to encounter.
Yeah, and that was the basis. You mentioned the civil rights movement and where marriage rates were during that time. The faith component as well as the family component is the reason why that movement was so successful the way it was. So how does the AND campaign, circling back to the AND campaign, how does the AND campaign support, address not just marriage, but also some of these other issues, whether it be life preborn life, whether it be taking care of mothers, immigration, some of these things. How does the AND campaign systematically address those issues?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of what we do is messaging. So one part of what we do is messaging. So we're going to come and we're going to say, I want to shine a light on the fact that as a Christian, you don't need to, it's not about justice or family. It's about both, right? That we need both of those. And so as a Christian, to care about family but go against justice doesn't make sense. Or to care about justice and go against family, it does not make sense. It doesn't come together right. So we want to shine a light on that. And then we have our whole life project where we have sisters that have come together that really care about the sanctity of life, that are pro-life, but they're saying even this pro-life thing kind of has a false dichotomy where one side cares about the woman and they talk about the woman and her choice as if there is no baby anywhere in there, or somebody just cares about the baby and talk about what's happened about the baby. Why don't we care about both? Why would we separate those two and fight it out in this culture war on those two when they're both together? They're both a part of each other. We can acknowledge both sides, and that's something that they don't do. So we have that project. As you know, we've been going on the HBCU tour. Yeah. So we've been to Morehouse, Spelman. We've been to Alcorn. We're going on to some other spots pretty soon, man.
Southern.
Southern. I'm excited about it. Yeah. But we're talking to young people in these spaces about a whole life ethic because it's something that you may not hear in academia in the same way. Yeah. And what surprised me is they actually get it, right? Like they actually catch on to it. Right, it makes sense. Yeah,
it makes sense. Yeah. I mean, so many times we're influenced by something you said to me, is that we're influenced and we think that everybody is the loudest voices. Mm-hmm. And the extremes are the loudest voices. And when you think about, let's just take the issue of abortion for a minute and just, for these students, they're thinking, okay, you've got a mother, you got a father, you got a preborn child. Why would I only focus on one and not the other? Like, why can't we do both? Exactly. It makes perfect sense, especially in the sense of the systemic injustices, whether it comes to housing insecurity or even hunger or education and opportunity that makes women, families vulnerable. Why can't we address all those sorts of things together? And that's where I see the AND campaign as kind of being the connecting point between that to even provide, not necessarily an alternative, but just provide the truth.
Yep. And so, I mean, we do things like that, but we also bring thinkers together, right? And so you've been in some of the sessions where we brought Dr. Charlie Dates, Lisa Fields, Esau McCauley, folks like that together to think about what is the future of what we've been calling orthodoxy and orthopraxy, which is right doctrine, that's orthodoxy, and right practice or right ethics, with this orthopraxy. How do we push this? And really things like the HBCU tour come out of those type of conversations where we're coming together and thinking through it and then putting people on the ground to get it done. So something else that you know about is we have what we're calling Lit City, which is a literacy project where we're bringing the cities all over the country to say, we want the church. I don't care who you voted for. I don't care what party you're in. If you're in the church and you love your neighbor, we need to come together and we need to fix this literacy crisis that we have among our children. That's something that we can come together and do. And that's really part of our theory of change, is that when Christians come together on issues that we share, we can actually heal partisan and racial divides. But we got to come together and do the work. Conversations are great, and we're going to have the conversations, but at some point you got to do the work.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. You know, going back to MLK 50, when I saw you, and just this idea of the church's role in addressing racism, so often it's statements about diversity. There's, some churches will, have a diversity council, or they will have you come speak for them, or they'll have a diversity Sunday where they'll talk about some of these issues. But what does true racial justice look like beyond those statements and those Sunday services, specifically for people that are in the church?
Yeah, I think one place is shared power and shared resources. Who's leading the effort? One thing the AND campaign tries to do is say, hey, we think that the Black church's public witness is something that the church in general should start to follow. That historic witness, right? Yeah. That historic witness is something that we think can lead us out of the culture war, can lead us out of some of the problems. Sometimes for other groups who have always been leading, it's actually time for you to follow. It's actually time to share resources and to do things differently, and to not just be about the politics of Christian self-interest, but be about the politics of thy neighbor, which is something that we don't always do well.
And how does that go over?
It depends on the audience. It depends on the audience.
Because I feel you. I agree with you. But as soon as you start talking about power and resources, true colors start coming out.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I've been, and don't get me wrong, I've been part of a number of initiatives where the people with power and the people with resources, when something gets tense, they take their ball and go home.
Yeah.
But I think one of the unique things about the AND campaign is we've built up the credibility in the traditional Black church, also in evangelical spaces, to be trusted by a lot of people who are of goodwill, who have that power and that resources to say, we trust you guys to try to bring this together.
Yeah.
And that's been a blessing, and it's taken a long time to get there.
It takes a long time, but you guys have operated with a lot of integrity and intentionality. You know, there's proof of you walking out the things that you profess. Let's talk a little bit about politics. I know politics are important to you. You've been in the political sphere. I'm still waiting for you to run for governor of this great state or something like that.
I'm waiting for you. Likewise, I'm waiting for you.
There are a lot of people who have expressed, feeling politically homeless. They feel like they're not far on the right, they're not far on the left, but they feel compelled, especially on national elections, that they have to vote for these extreme characters and platforms. What's your message to people that feel politically homeless? Is that, or should we feel politically homeless? I mean, Scripture talks a lot about the fact that we're aliens, that we're passing through. Is some of that just how we should feel, especially as believers, or is there a real problem there? How do we navigate that?
I would say that's good. I'm not as worried about people who feel the tension of being in a particular party or feel the tension of trying to fit into one of these two categories. I'm not as worried about them as people who fit into either the left or the right in one party or the other and don't feel any tension. So I don't tell you can't be in a party, but for you to be a Republican and not feel any tension about how immigrants are being treated, to me, that's a little bit of a problem. For you to be a Democrat and not have any problem with their stance on abortion or sexual ethics, that's a problem to me, right? And so if you feel that tension, that is good. The question from there is, what do I do with that tension? And what the AND campaign tells people is, it's not as much about being on the right side as it is taking the right position. So what I don't want Christians to do is say, I feel that tension, therefore I'm just going to go in this squishy middle and I'm just going to play both sides and not do anything. No, it's really about, okay, I might not be on either side, but what is the right position on any of these given issues, which may put me in a variety of sides or places, but it's about the right position, a position that's just, a position that's moral, rather than, and here's what happens when we take a side. When we take a side, we kind of outsource our public witness to other people. We let them do the thinking. We let them to create the talking points. And because they're better than these guys over here, I'm just going to go along with that. Well, that's a problem, Matt. You can miss a lot of things if you're letting somebody else who may not be a Christian at all, may not share many of your values, make those decisions for you. And the thing is, when Christians are just choosing a side, we're not leading.
Okay.
Right? That's not leadership to just say, well, they're better than them, so I'm going to just go with them. And that's not what Jesus did. Jesus comes into a very tense socio-political moment.
Yeah.
And when he comes into that moment, he can be a zealot, he could be a Herodian, he can choose all these different things. I don't see him choose those. I don't see him say, well, the Pharisees are really legalistic, I'll just be a Herodian or a Sadducee. No, he said, I'm going to do something completely different because both of these get it wrong. And that's what I think a lot of people are either afraid to do or don't know how to do. But I think it's imperative if the Christian public witness in America is going to be faithful.
Okay. Well, I agree with you on that. I agree. And I think a lot of people understand that. They would say, of course, I need to be, I don't want to outsource my witness on this issue. I should have this sort of tension. But the way things are set up in this country, how do you get things done? We don't have someone that's electable, in the sense of funding and a position that represents those sorts of things. And so people feel like they have to choose somebody if they want to get anything done. So how does a Christian navigate that wants to be civically involved?
Yeah, I mean, it's true that Jesus isn't on the ballot. And so when you make a choice, you're usually choosing between two flawed, to different degrees, I'm not saying they're the same, but two flawed candidates.
Yeah.
The first thing I would say is, in that regard, make the best decision you can prayerfully and move on. But you got to understand, that vote is a small part of your public witness. That's only a part of your public witness. And there's enough, you as an individual, you have some power, but it's not all that much by yourself. But there are tons of homeless Christians and homeless people of good faith in general, and they have a lot of power. Like, the politically homeless church in America is a sleeping giant. And if we are able to come together and say, I may be Republican, I may be Democrat, or I may not really care about either one, kind of like me, then we can get a lot of things done, right? Because you would have, if you could create that sort of coalition, you don't have to have a whole nother party. You just have to use the leverage of that coalition to lean to help one party or the other choose a candidate that's more acceptable. Lean in on an issue like the pro-life issues or how women are being treated and what resources are available for children and women when the children are born, and on issues that are very justice-oriented or, morality-oriented. That's a very, that type of alliance has a lot of dexterity, and it's a nimble alliance that would have a whole lot of power, but we just have to believe that it's possible. That type of alliance would be extremely
and
powerful.
We don't believe it's possible because we don't see it, and what we do see in media is the total antithesis of that.
Exactly.
We see the bombastic politicians and we see that sort of thing, and we kind of walk into that without imagining something different.
There are a lot of influencers and a lot of allies that we have that don't want us to think it's possible, that have an interest against us not coming together with people who may have voted differently than us, and we don't understand why they voted that way, but have 2 or 3, 4 or 5 issues that we agree with them on and say, let's connect on this. But guess what? That doesn't happen if I'm super emotional in the public square. If I'm emotional and I can't talk to you, I can't look at you because you voted differently than me, that's just not a savvy political way to go about politics. Ain't about that. And that doesn't mean you can't be passionate and all that, but you got to be more shrewd. The Bible talks about being shrewd. If I'm going to be shrewd, I got to look at the X's and O's. I got to say, okay, how can I get things done, righteous things, just things, moral things done in the public square, which often means, and we even see it in the Bible, working with non-believers, working with people I don't completely agree with all the time. That's how you get things done. But we have a very emotional, we have a lot of influencers who like to keep us enraged, who are always screaming, who all they talk about is how bad every single body else on the other side is, as if everybody on the side is exactly the same.
Exactly.
Right? And they don't want us to see that there's any opportunity there. And so we gotta be watchful about who we allow to have that type of influence over us, because we just have allies that don't want us to connect with other Christians or
because they benefit from the discord.
Yeah, absolutely, they benefit from it. I mean, that's how you get ratings. If I can go on there and talk about Trump for 2 hours a day and never talk about anything else, and I get high ratings, and that's what I'm going to do when there's a lot of other stuff to be talking about, even though that is significant.
Yeah, those things are an impediment to justice, and they actually plant seeds of an unjust life in us, because then we're always looking to win. What I've seen a lot is that we're in a winner take all culture, zero sum game. Yeah. I want to beat you. I want to say something to cancel you. I want to come out on top. And I'm not really concerned about doing justice or serving anybody. I'm more concerned about my platform. Yeah. Something else you said, we're going to talk about practicing, the just life. You recently said this. You said, I wonder if Americans' single-minded focus on national politics makes it easier to refuse responsibility for ourselves and mercy for the oppressed. You said we'll overlook the chaos on our front doorstep to obsess over faraway problems and the people we suppose are causing them. So what does the just life require of us in this moment? Are you saying that some people would rather not deal with their own opportunity to act justly?
Yeah. I mean, think about it. We probably both talk to people that live in a democratic state, in a democratic city, and all they do is talk about how bad Republicans are when a Republican ain't ran that state or city ever.
Ain't got no control over anything in that jurisdiction.
In recent history, right? And the same thing, somebody who lives in a red state, in a red city, all that stuff, and all they do is complain about Democrats. That doesn't make sense. To me, as I said in the article, that's a cop-out. That's a way of not dealing with the stuff that's going on near you. Because Trump is responsible for a lot of things, and I have a lot to say about that. There's so many things that were happening before he came in our communities, in other communities, that has nothing to do with that we have not solved, that we have not taken our agency to cure. And we can use these individuals, we can use these monsters that we create that may be doing damage, but the idea that they're responsible for everything we do and we can just load all this years of stuff on them, that's not healthy and it's not helping the community. And so I never want to, and I don't want to give them that power. Yeah. I don't want to give somebody power that they really don't have and make my people think that they have more power than they really do. And too often that happens when we try to blame one group or one person for everything. Mm-hmm. We don't see where our sphere of influence starts and where it ends.
Okay. Well, practically speaking, what's one or two things that people listening can do, not just to support AIM campaign, which is part of it, mm-hmm. but even if they're, on their own, they're on their job, they're with their family, how do people walk this fine line of, more order, social justice, conviction, and compassion?
Yeah. So you got to read the justice stories in the Bible. You got to read through Amos. You got to read through Isaiah. You got to read through Jeremiah. You got to read the gospel mm-hmm. and how Jesus looked at these issues. And that's big, because if you don't do that, you very much can get a distorted view of what justice is. You've got to start there. All right. Read your history with your kids, with people. Get to know the history of what actually happened in America, whether it's racial history, whether it's the history of justice when it comes to labor. That's a huge area as well, right? Like, do we know about the progressive era and how it took down the Gilded Age and all that? Like, do we need to know that stuff so that we can understand how we got to where we are today? And then from there, I think it's knowing about the needs of your local community. How are people hurting? How are people suffering? How are people being treated near you? And how can you get your group of friends, your church, your city and community involved in those issues? I think that's a great place to start. And it's something, I don't care how successful you are, it's something all of us can get involved in.
Where do you go for that info? Because honestly, we look at politics as national. Something you always talk about is that mm-hmm. politics are local, and you can make more of a difference, and you need to make more of a difference, in your local communities. But so many people, they understand what you just said, but they just don't know where to start. Like, how do I find out? I'm not a community organizer. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know how to do those sorts of things. Yeah. But I know there are problems. How do I find those out?
So you probably have a neighborhood organization or some kind of community organization that sometimes you can just sit and listen. You can go to the city council and sit in and listen there. You can go to the school board and just listen to what issues people are bringing up. Yeah. And as you listen and hear those issues, as you read the local newspaper, talk to people in your church, usually there's somebody in your church that knows about the issues that are going on in that community.
There's definitely a grandma. There's a grandma in there.
There you go. Have a conversation. You got You got institutional knowledge. You got people who know what's been going on for years. Yeah. You got people who are engaged in what's going on today. Have those conversations with them, and then you don't have to be afraid necessarily of engaging or joining secular organizations. Some organizations, I believe in common grace, do great things, but make sure that you know what you agree on and where you diverge as far as values. Because I've seen a lot of people join secular organizations and not think through, well, they diverge with me on this particular conviction or that particular conviction. And if I don't think that out before I get in the middle of it, then I just kind of drift off to wherever they're taking me.
And then it goes back to what you said about not being willing to call out the organization that you're attached to, even though they diverge in that way. Political ideology, or idolatry, political idolatry. Mm-hmm. I feel like we've seen a lot of that specifically with President Trump. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's to the same extent with Biden, but there's this kind of culture within many churches where, I've visited a lot of different churches, different types mm-hmm. of churches, spoken at them. And it's really interesting to see how, many times Christians make a political leader somewhat of an idol. Mm-hmm. He's infallible. He can do no wrong. How do Christians guard themselves against that in this day and age?
I think it's the true belief and practice of knowing that nobody is above or below critique. The Bible talks a lot about impartiality. That means discerning things and weighing things based on the same standards. So if I have a standard that I set for Biden, I have to keep that same standard for Trump. If I have a standard that I set, for Kamala, I got to keep that same standard for J.D. Vance. And the sad thing is we don't do that. We change the standard based on who we're talking about and if we like them or don't like them. And that's idolatry. That's raising and exalting one person to a place that they can't be. Everybody, the church, if the church isn't willing and church leaders aren't willing to critique people in power, what are we doing? What are we doing in politics if we're afraid or just unwilling to critique them in an honest way? And here's the other thing, we have to believe that the truth matters and the truth will always end up in what's good. Because what happens is I may say, okay, I got to say something about a Democratic politician. I know most people in my community are Democratic. I might as well not say it. I got to say it,
Yeah.
even if it doesn't seem like it's in my immediate self-interest. Because at the end of the day, if I don't critique that person and I know they did something wrong, then the next time I have an opportunity to critique Trump or somebody else, I don't have no credibility. Why would they listen to me? Because I didn't critique Kamala or Biden when I had an opportunity to.
Yeah.
That's why we got to be impartial, not only because it's faithful, but because we lose credibility, and credibility is currency in the public discourse.
And that currency ultimately is about having a gospel witness.
Yeah.
And one of the things I think that you've done well, the AND campaign has done well, and many Christians have done well, and something that I try to do is understand that the ultimate goal, even in the critique, is to have an opportunity to show Jesus to people, and to show what justice really is. Justice isn't just, as you mentioned, if it's partial, if it's on a curve, if it's unwilling to say things that may not be popular and may not be self-serving because they are true and need to be said. So the ultimate goal is the gospel. But for churches, we talked about what individuals should do, how they should engage in justice issues. How should churches or the church engage in issues like incarceration or poverty or hunger? We talked a little bit about racism, but what are some ways that church leaders and church congregations can address these issues?
I think by first applying biblical principles to those issues, not just saying, hey, we should go do this because it sounds good. No, what biblical principles compel us to get involved, compel us to have a prison ministry, compel us to make sure that we're feeding the poor and that we're making sure that the kids in our area can read. Let's talk about the biblical principles first, and I think that drives people to see this isn't partisan. And I don't care. Yeah. And here's the other thing, not be partisan when we do it, right? To be able to say, I don't care if Democrats support this or Republicans support this, it's right. And that's an analysis that sadly just doesn't happen as much. It's like, well, what side is on this on? And if you choose an issue that's on that side, then, you must be being partisan. No, I chose it because let me show you these biblical principles that I really care about. So I think that's the best place to start. And again, listening to people in your community to see what the felt need is so that what needs to be addressed.
Well, what's next for the AND campaign? What's next for Justin Giboney?
Like I was saying before, we have our Lit City initiative coming to a city near you, hopefully. It'll be, it'll kind of be starting in Atlanta. We know that our friend, Dr. Charlie Dates, already has something very similar and awesome in Chicago. And so that's great. And then I wrote a book, man. So I got a book coming out, Don't Let Nobody Turn You Around, how the Black church's public witness leads us out of the culture war, where I really wanted to get into the fact that the primary stream of the Black church was Orthodox, and civil rights comes out of this orthodoxy, and this orthodoxy applied to what was going on in society. I think there's been this lie that's tried to secularize the civil rights movement, tried to secularize what was going on during Reconstruction. And I want to show people, no, this was very much about the authority of Scripture. The motivation behind what they were doing was the promises of God and what Scripture said they should do and what they could do and what was coming, what would come to them. People need to understand that because that movement and the church's public witness never fit into this binary of conservative versus progressive. I go through the book kind of showing people how that witness always challenged both sides, never just accepted or let one side control it. And that's not really going on today. I think too many Christians, as we talked about before, have allowed progressivism or conservatism to be the master of their social action. That's not our legacy. We can provide more than that. And so that's what I'm trying to push people to do.
All right. You talked about the book. You opened up a little bit of can. So I got to ask a follow-up question on that.
Okay.
If that's the truth about the civil rights movement, that it was an orthodox movement, And now fast forward, 50 years, whatever, 60 years, it's not the same way. What transpired to get us off, without giving your whole book?
Yeah.
What transpired to get us off the rails to where we are now, where we've included or been bought by progressives?
Now you're trying to get me in trouble, right? No, see, that's a good
of
question.
Course.
I think it's deep, though. I think it really is deep. I think you get into a situation where, let's be honest, a lot of the civil rights leaders died with nothing. Right? You're talking about people who were traveling, speaking on the biggest stages, and you get home and you almost losing your home. Like you don't have, and so you do see, and I want to be able to do this justice in a nutshell. You do see progressives reaching out and providing, hey, come work at my school, come do, and a lot of that I think was in good faith to say, hey, I want you to come speak here. I want to give you a professorship. I want you. So you see people reaching out, hey, run for office. You ain't gonna run for office with the Republicans at that time.
Yeah,
you can run for office as a Democrat, and so you do see that group being more so endeared and good. And I don't want to act like it was all just like a ploy. I think some of it was very much in good faith.
Yeah,
I think it goes too far because I think at some point our leadership starts completely giving our whole public witness to progressive Democratic side of things in response to how bad things were on the right. So we have to acknowledge that. And that's where it kind of starts to fall apart, and we start to combine our witness with one that's far too secular, far too permissive, and things go awry from there. So hopefully that's warms people up a little bit for the book.
Yeah, we got to remember who you are. And it's unfortunate because a lot of spiritual leaders are leading people right off a cliff, and they don't know it. And it's a shame, and it angers me. We've talked about it. It angers me. So I'm excited for that book. I'm excited for that book because one way you confront injustice, one way you confront false narratives by shining the light of truth on them. Yeah. And one thing you said earlier was about educating ourselves and our children. Yeah. And that goes hand in hand with much of what's happened in the church.
And just one more thing, if I could, I understand the anger and upset that people have, how upset people are with the right. But it's unwise to respond to what the right has done wrong by selling people or pushing people into the arms of the secular left. And that's exactly what I see a lot of Christian leaders doing.
Wow. Appreciate you, man. Lastly, this podcast is called The Just Life. And so we ask everybody what the just life means to them. So the just life means what to Justin?
Sacrificing for your neighbor, not just being worried about you and what's in your bank account, but being worried about what your neighbor is going through and doing it, not because you'll necessarily get the result that you want immediately, but doing it to glorify God.
Amen. Appreciate you, brother.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome.
Appreciate you, man.